Hi, I'm David Chislett, and together with my co-host Alia Sandoba, we're really happy to welcome you to the Playful Creative Summit 2020. This summit is unique in the marketplace because we're bringing the two worlds of playfulness and creativity together for the first time in a series of authentic conversations with practitioners in various fields, including coaching, training, games making, online game design, designers, writers, and painters. And right now I'm joined by Shayne Smart, who is a management consultant and a game storming workshop designer. Wow, probably didn't say that right. Welcome, Shayne.
Hello, David.
All right. So first of all, what I just said, what does that even mean?
Yeah, so a lot of the problems that we try to solve in work are not really clear linear processes that go from A to B. So what I try to do, or what I actually do with clients, is I run workshops using more game-based methods. Because in a game, you often know what your goal is, but you don't know how you're going to get there.
Right.
So we use chains of exercises, which are set up as mini games. It's a methodology called game storming. And through these mini games, you get through to what is the end answer of your strategy, or the change you need to make, or the new process.
Okay, so you get to play games for a living.
Yeah, and nicely, we also use visual thinking, so I get to draw for a living as well.
Cool. All right, so that leads me to there's a nice logic to my first question then. When you were a kid growing up, what was your favorite game or your favorite toy?
Yeah, so we had my favorite thing to do in class was to draw pictures of spaceships on paper. We actually had a class in primary school, which was a game in itself. We had, at our primary school, it was a rural place in Australia, about half an hour from anywhere of any note. And the teacher that we had was a principal, and the principal didn't have time really to educate the class. So he gave us a whole bunch of pre-made packets of materials, and he'd have on the wall a schedule of everything it had to do with the week. You had to do 2 maths, 1 creative writing, et cetera, et cetera. If you were diligent, you could get 3 weeks ahead in 3 days. So that meant you got to have 2 weeks and, well, 2.5 weeks of just doing whatever you wanted to play. So we used to do a lot of creative writing, drawing, spaceship games. When it got really boring, we would run away from school and play football. I was particularly bad at that because I was the smallest person in the class, so I'd get crushed. So I tend to stay away from those kind of sports. But what it did result in is playing a lot up climbing trees.
Okay.
So creative drawing, creative writing, and climbing trees.
Okay. So obviously life after school happens. What was the key event or moment that made you realize that using that playfulness, that creativity was going to be a work thing as well?
That was when I was first starting to learn to program. I first got engaged with computers way back when, and I wanted to write stories, and I really wanted to write stories to basically to engage with an end audience. And during that, I wanted to be able to ask questions to the user and then branch, what you call today choose your own adventure, which then related in multi-user dungeons, etc. And during that process, it was pretty apparent that what I really wanted to do was I wanted to work with computers. And back then, working with computers meant either making games or working with mainframes. So that really formed the basis of the work that I wanted to do, and use particularly graphics and to use programming. But within a couple of years, in about 4 years, I was already working to design visual interfaces for project management companies that were doing construction work. And in that, what you find is that a lot of the time, the only way that you can solve a problem is by creating a prototype. And often those prototypes come from just playing around.
Right. Okay. So obviously this means that in most of your career, and especially right now, you need to be pretty much creative on tap.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And and the biggest component of that is to be able to, you need to be in a playful mode means that you're relaxed about taking risks, and being relaxed about taking risks means that you're able to explore further and find more and more interesting solutions. And a lot of being able to have that play is to feel that you're in a safe space to do so.
Right. So what do you do on a daily basis to facilitate that? Do you have any sort of rituals or things that you do that aren't necessarily creative that make that possible?
I have almost the opposite problem. I have rituals to not play. So
Yeah.
every ritual I have around is don't play, not now. So often, I use a lot of the tools of the trade at home. So, in workshops, you use a lot of Post-it notes, and so I have all the things you can't see here. A litany of Post-it notes arranged in various colors, and obviously that's playful in itself because you've got a lot of bright colors. But what it does tend to do is also distract. So ways that I control and contain my play is I give myself a time limit of how long I'm allowed to go off on a particular tangent or to explore something. I find that if you're truly interested in a topic, it's very difficult to hold yourself back from wanting to dive into it and explore it and unravel all the threads. So the way I do that is I use a tool called MURAL. It's an online whiteboarding tool, but it's also can be used for online assembly of ideas, illustration, usage of icons, sketching, all these kind of things in a collaborative environment. So I tend to open up MURAL, open up the tool, and I give myself a time of like 15, 20 minutes maximum to explore all the idea, pull the research, throw all the web pages together, find out what are the key challenges to solve in whatever idea it is that, whatever the latest crazy idea is,
right.
Package it all up. From there, throw all the cards into Trello so that I've got a sequence step if I want to come back to it, and then shut it down, turn it off, and go back to work.
Right, so that's not working. That sounds a lot like working to me.
It does sound like working, but it's not. Usually, the most interesting things that you can apply to your work, or the most unique things that are differentiated, are things that you've explored and discovered that nobody else has discovered. And to find new things, you have to have or you don't have to, but having an interested mind and going out and starting to play with something. So, for example, how could I use my home phone to control all the lights in my house from outside? Might be a question. How could I make it that when I put my phone down on the side of the lounge, all the lights change in my house? It's kind of something that, well, I would want to do. But by doing that and working on it, then what you're actually doing is through that play, it's very safe and easy way to learn about home automation, about programming, about about how to consider the interaction between different humans in the same space.
Right.
And although it does sound like work, because it's just following an interest, then I come out and you build a whole bunch of skills, which you can then, next time somebody says, what I really need to be able to do is I need to be able to automate some particular aspect of the work environment to do something. You already know the answer to that.
All right. So no meditating, walking the dog, or anything like that for you?
No, it's build.
Build.
It's to build a working model of it, try it, glue the pieces together, cut it out of paper, get a piece of wood and saw it into shape to make it work.
So
to really experiment.
When's your downtime where all this unconscious connecting of the dots is supposed to go on for creative people?
The shower is one.
Right.
Sitting and talking with friends is another, in a bar. On a really boring phone call with a piece of paper in front of me, doodling all the pictures out. I mean, I guess most of I have kind of the opposite problem. Most of mine's trying to rein it in. My brain's always doing that, so I have to turn it off.
Right. So anything where you're not actually being creative is downtime.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, actually, that's true. Yeah, so downtime. Yeah, working is. Creative is uptime.
Right. So how do you define creativity, Shayne? I mean, there's so many different answers to this question. So it's always nice to hear how people in different spheres respond to that. I mean, what is it actually?
Yeah, so I tend to think of creativity as generating something new. and by new, it could be a change in something that exists, or it could be creating something entirely new that doesn't exist at all. Whether it's a piece of art or a metaphor or a thinking framework, but I always think of it as new and original.
Interesting.
So
So it's just a change of something that already exists. How original is that?
well, it would be when I say change of something, I don't mean changing the red box to blue, because that's just changing its color. But perhaps changing the red box to something that was semi-transparent you could pick up off the screen and throw across the room and catch. That would be creative and interesting.
Okay. So if I came up to you one day after a workshop, because I was super impressed with the highly creative and playful way that you ran everything, and I was like, come on, Shayne, I'm a boring accountant. I don't have a creative bone in my body. What one thing, just one thing, can I do that'll make me more creative tomorrow if I start practicing it?
To take whatever it is you want to be creative with, look up one random thing in the encyclopedia or dictionary of your choice. Combine the two objects together and describe what it would look like.
Right.
For the practice to create something new, it's often a combination of many things. If you get used to the idea of taking two very disparate things and thinking about their properties and combining them together, then you start firing the neurons in your brain. And it will help you to look at the question of what would need to be true for these things to work together. What is the commonality between these things? What is the pattern I can find? So then, as an accountant, you can look at your work and think, how do I get from here to there? What would I need? What might need to be true?
Nice. Good answer. I really like that one. I want to quickly rewind a bit. You mentioned earlier on in this chat about safe spaces.
Yeah.
So now, obviously, you're a facilitator. You're taking people through a story game-based experience, and you really need people to participate. And anyone who wants to be creative needs to have that safe space. So how do you create that? What are the steps?
In terms of groups, it's about getting the group to agree to a set of standards by which they'll work and how they'll communicate. So, for example, you can make rules about asking closed questions, about judgment, about the nature of the language that people use together. So I'm sure many people are very familiar with the exercise yes and or no but, and clearly define within the day when are you opening up and expanding and opening up on ideas, when are you exploring, and when is it time to make decisions and judgment. So it's very clear to people when they are being creative and non-judgmental, and very clear when they are being judgmental and when is the right time for each.
Okay. So for someone sitting at home, what that basically means is deciding on day whatever that I'm now just going to mess around and I'm going to do that for X amount of time. And then at some stage, I need to come back and actually judge this and decide whether I can build on it or throw it away.
Yeah, that's a really great parallel. So, I mentioned very earlier on that I try to time box the release of a creative explosion. And that time boxing is, okay, now I'm allowed to open for 10, 15 minutes, and then I have to close.
Right. You have to close. You have to take it somewhere.
I have to close it out. And the value in closing out and taking those decisions, taking a decision about it. Sometimes it's, I'll open up a box of ideas like, how might we do that? Look into it, open up a whole bunch of potential paths, and then realize that probably it's too much effort to do it. But that's then at the closing stage. It's
right.
What are all the possible ideas? What are a couple of different paths? Okay, now, are any of these paths viable? Yes, no. Close it totally and put it in the dumped pile, or do I open up and put it on the shelf to do later?
Okay, cool, nice. I can imagine that when you say game storming to people and you say, now we're going to be creative, you encounter a lot of myths. I think people have some fairly strange ideas about what these terms mean. What are the myths that get in the way of you doing your job?
Well, workshops generally get a bad rap, and I think that's very fair. I think there are an enormous number of poorly structured, unplanned workshops out there. The idea of game storming is really based on brainstorming. And the important thing for people to know is that it's to take collaborative exercises or collaborative games that multiple people can do together and do it in a playful way, which feels like a game. But it is not about rolling the dice. It's not about random. And games in themselves are a very useful mechanism for humans to explore different possibilities and to try out in a safe space in itself. What people don't often think about is they think of games and they think games are trivial. But let's look at the extreme end of the curve. War games are in no way trivial, and that's the way they're defined in a nation's military. I don't propose that people try war games at home, but games in themselves provide you with the opportunity to learn, but also to get there through a non-direct route. And if you look at most of the problems today, if it's a really direct route, if you know how to get there, then first of all, you're probably not watching this video, right? And second of all, if it's that obvious, then everybody's doing it,
right?
And so you need to play and explore to develop new strategies. Every kid that learned to play chess learned a whole bunch of things about strategy, not only just on a little checkered board, but they also learned things about strategy, about providing things like my favorite move in chess is what you call a fork. So you position one of your pieces so that you threaten two of the other pieces of the other player. So this means that in this state, the player is going to lose a piece. From a strategic point of view, generally, it can mean that if somebody's treating you badly in your personal life, for example, you can put them in a position that they either have to behave well or they have to sacrifice something which they're unlikely to be willing to sacrifice. So that's just an example from chess. Checkers can tell you how to jump queues down at McDonald's. Everybody's looking the wrong way. Lift bit left, bit to the right, and you're over there. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Now,
games all serve a purpose for learning.
I like that. I mean, that's how children learn, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So all of this stuff, creativity, games, gamification, all is, very current, very trendy right now. What do you see as the most important role that these things can play as we move into an increasingly technological future? Why are they important?
Because they enable us to experience potential future scenarios that we don't know how they'll play out, but we can actually test the scenarios. We actually try them. We can actually see, we can answer the question, what if? And what if might be, what if great, but it can also be what if bad. What do I do if, I live in Holland. What do I do if the dikes break and all the land's filled up with water? How would I get out? What does that game look like? What might that tell me about things like water pollution, about water sanitary, about medical supplies I need, about don't buy on the ground floor, about make sure you've got a dinghy tied up on your roof. And maybe it also tells me that the probability of that happening is so low that I should spend my time worrying about something else.
Right.
I once went to the Sellafield nuclear reactor in the UK, and they let you control in a simulation the nuclear rods which went into the reactor. And I found it really interesting that in that game, they wouldn't allow you to make the reactor blow up. But as we all know, that's not actually true in nuclear reactors. It is possible. So that would be an example of a game where you didn't really get to understand the true consequences and to learn strategies for dealing with them before having to be presented with them in real life. And that's what all games are doing for us. Yeah. We get a chance to experience and build practice before we have to face the real event.
Nice, nice.
Plus, they just drive our dopamine centers as well. Makes us happy. Every time we get a level up, a progress hit, a win, it's actually physically good for us.
Right. So as a behavior driver, it has the inbuilt reward, which gets people doing more of what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. From a workshop perspective, yes. The thing that gets people getting more of what they want is they see visible progress towards the target by using games and workshops. But also when you come to decisions, it feels really, you get this kind of feeling of, well, literally closure.
And everyone likes a bit of closure. So you've mentioned a couple of things, drawing and obviously the game storming and workshop facilitating, and quite clearly in the beginning there, coding. What is a hidden talent that you have that nobody else really knows about?
Oh, I don't know if it's a talent. A talent would be I can take most things from theoretical to practical in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
We could test it if you like.
No, I've seen you do it and I can't. So.
The way to develop that talent is through playing games. So if you think about games are a set of rules, which is a set of theory.
Yeah.
You have a space to play them in. You have a time in which they're set in a context. So often you're playing with those rules, which is just a theory, to be able to explore them to the conclusion. So when you play a lot of games and you get familiar with playing games, then it becomes very, very quick to be able to take a set of rules or a set of theories and then just translate them into, okay, this is how I should apply them on my next turn, on my next move.
All right, cool. Shayne, I'm also just very interested because you mentioned a few things earlier in this conversation about resources for gaming, for creative thinking. You mentioned a few things. Like what's in your grab bag of tools that anybody who's interested in exploring creative thinking digitally might want to think about signing up for or researching?
Yeah, so my go-to list is actually only two things now. My primary one is MURAL. I use MURAL as an experiment, as a workspace for experimenting both with ideas, but to rapidly visualize. And actually, interestingly enough, or almost in parallel, my offline parallel is just sketching and post-it notes. The reason for those two things is when you organize, or at least the way my mind works, is if you organize all your different creative thoughts or ideas into single nodes or single points, then it's very easy to reassemble them. So, if you're writing down a page, then you end up with this, here we go, invisible post-it notes. You end up with a very structured list, which is difficult to reorder. But once you've got it onto, I don't know, maybe 100 post-it notes, then you can reorganize it into columns, you can make associations, you can draw a dinosaur out of it and give it an eye with a blue post-it note, whatever you want to happen to do. But it means that you've got the flexibility to reorganize and recombine your ideas without the complete effort of having to regenerate and spit them out. So for me, MURAL is exactly the same idea. I can generate a series of ideas onto a visual canvas, organize them and structure them. I can annotate them with illustrations. And then if I want, I can reuse and repurpose them for other parts of the world, other parts of the web. So mostly what I try to do actually now is I try to build, what is a toy that I could build that other people could play with to understand the idea?
Right.
So you can think of, we have games, and games are completely based rule things, but we also have toys, and toys tend to evoke an emotion. And a singular toy is something that you might craft to help somebody understand an idea. For example, if I want to, in business, describe to you how I just can't understand the process you're trying to do in your mind, then a way that you might illustrate that in as a toy is you might give somebody the ability to reach it into a physical toy. Might be you'd give somebody a black box with 2 glove holes. You can reach into it and you can feel what the objects are, but you don't know what's actually going on in there. Which is kind of, that would be a super simple toy. It's not a game. It has no rules, but it will evoke this emotion of frustration and confusion of trying to work out exactly what it is they're playing with.
All right.
And that would be a version of a toy in real life, but you can also develop that in something like MURAL.
Cool. Thanks, Shayne. So we've got your website address here next to the video that we're sharing. If people log on to your site now, what are they going to see? What's going on there?
So what I've been working on at the moment is how do we enable people to be able to bring more gamification and structure into their workshops and into their meetings. I'm a firm believer that most of us sit in really suck meetings most of the time. So how can we make those more engaging, more fun, more productive? And what you'll find on the website is a series of templates, and we're going to launch a service which is predefined paths that you can follow or games that you can play to solve strategic problems, vision problems, or just have a less shitty next meeting.
I like the sound of that already. Great, Shayne, thank you so much. It's been awesome speaking to you.
Thank you, David.
I always have to ask this question because I get distracted. Is there anything that you really wanted to talk about that I did not ask you a question about?
Yes. How do we use games to organize ourselves to change the world against carbon, destruction by carbon, destruction of human rights, and getting rid of shitty politicians?
Right.
There are many great politicians,
yeah,
but in the world we face today, things aren't quite serving us.
So how do we do that?
Well, I think what we do is we design games which are based on effectively aggregating groups of people and helping them to work together to put social pressure on through things like crystalknows.com, the psychological analysis tool, into groups of politicians, into people who work with fossil fuels, and get them and give them a playbook on how they can work with those people to change their minds.
I like the collaboration part because I think we live in such a polarized world where everything's if you're not with me, you're against me, and there's very little interaction. Well, particularly online, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody, we are all different, and we all have different strengths, and we all have different ways we prefer to communicate. But what we will all probably find in common is that we can play some kind of game together.
Right. Awesome, Shayne. Thanks so much. It's been really good speaking to you.
Thank you.
For everybody who's watching here, if you really enjoyed this conversation, this video will be live for the length of the summit, so you can come back later and watch it again. If you really like what Shayne had to say, as well as all the other speakers, you'll see also on this page a link to our All Access Pass, which is a pass that you can purchase, which gives you access to all the videos for 12 calendar months, so you can watch and rewatch at your leisure. And yeah, you can just click on that link. All the details are there. So once again, Shayne, thanks so much for joining us. Oh, thanks, he's disappearing.
Thanks a lot.
Till next time.
Bye.